Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm David Blight, the director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery and Abolition. We have about a dozen great folks here in the room in Rosencrantz Hall, and welcome to all you out online. Today's a special treat. We don't often get to hear from someone among the great collection of Yale librarians. And those of us who do research, and those of us who may not, owe them a great deal. I spent a lot of time in the Beinecke and other precincts around the libraries, and you all are our angels. Charles Riley has been here at Yale since the late 1990s. He has a bachelor's degree from Drexel University.
No,
What is
McAllister.
McAllister?
Yeah.
What'd you do at Drexel?
It was library science.
You did library science at Drexel. You went to McAllister College in Minnesota. Sorry. Our undergraduate alma maters are important to our souls, so I'm sorry for that. Came here for graduate work, additional library science, has also studied library science elsewhere and taught elsewhere, but he is the catalog librarian of African languages in the Yale library system. That says a great deal because he's going to tell us, I'm sure, but there are as many as 300 or so languages that you have in one way or another cataloged.
Yes.
And that may be a surprise to non-Africanists of just how many indigenous languages there were, or in many cases still are. This is going to be a presentation about a manuscript, an amazing manuscript. That Charles you're part of a group that's bringing this manuscript to the public fore. It's an indigenous Vai script, B-A-I, the Vai people of West Africa, particularly the region of modern Liberia. But the Vai had a place, as I remember from my own old readings on the slave trade, in the coastal and West African slave trade. But this script, this language that came about in what, 1830s?
1832, roughly.
1832, has been used over and over, but particularly by Boima Kiakpomgbo. You pronounce that better.
Boima Kiakpomgbo.
That's much better. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But it's around 180 pages. A remarkable document, a remarkable manuscript. So, Charles, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us all about this manuscript. Tell us even also about your work. And what does the Catalog Librarian of African Languages actually do? I mean, I think we'd be interested in that too. So, welcome, Charles, and welcome to all our audience out there. Over to you.
Thank you, David, for the kind introduction. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. Yale University acknowledges that indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Skytycoke, Golden Hill, Pagosset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. So David's kindly introduced the subject of the manuscript of Boima Kiakpomgbo. It's a diary from 1913 to 1923 and a little bit after. The last date goes till about 1927. But it talks largely about the daily life of Boima, who was involved in the courts, the local justice system in Liberia. After the Vai Kingdom had become a part of what is now the Republic of Liberia, but it was before the timing of a League of Nations report from 1930 that went in to investigate the role of forced labor and slavery in Liberia. So this gives us a little bit of an insight, kind of a slice of life in terms of what was going on with slavery as well as daily life in Liberia at the time. Within the field of African studies, there exists a growing subfield of analysis of African manuscripts. More well-known and established threads of this tradition cover Ethiopic, Ajami, Arabic, and Coptic, which have histories going back as far as the 3rd century of the Common Era, stretching further back if one includes more from Egyptology. More recently, 19th century manuscripts have come to light from the Vai and Bamon traditions, and 20th century manuscripts are represented in Wolof, Mende, Loma, and Pele scripts, among others. In this paper, I will discuss in particular one exemplar of the Vai manuscript tradition, the Diary of Boima Kiakpomgbo from 1913 and following years, and examine in part what it has to tell us about indigenous Liberian slavery. First, a little more background. The historical subject of indigenous Vai slavery is not new. It received noteworthy attention in 1930 from a League of Nations Commission report, and into the 1960s and 70s from Walter Rodney, Paul Lovejoy, Sven Holso, and others more recently, including Makrufi Usman Traore. Addressing it in the context of the current political moment, where our understanding of the brutality of slavery as an institution is being challenged, may be uncomfortable but also necessary for a broader understanding of the continued relevance and importance of its analysis. Paul Lovejoy notes, quote, although African slavery was in some ways unique, its development was strongly influenced by slavery in the Islamic and European worlds. Hence, to speak of an indigenous slavery is an analytical convenience that should not be construed as an indication that African slavery developed in isolation. Quite the contrary, the Islamic connection began with the demand for enslaved persons from sub-Saharan Africa, and the demand continued through the 19th century. But Islam also became the religion of slaveholders in large parts of Africa, so that the Islamic dimension became an indigenous factor at the same time that it remained an external influence. European involvement in Africa has been so closely associated with slavery that to disassociate Europe from the study of the institution is impossible, except for the period before circa 1500. There are a few other manuscripts that I would first like to introduce to relate to the diary to, one from the Timbuktu tradition from around the end of the Mali Empire of the Manding Heartland, which Adam Jones and P.T.H. Harris separately remind us served as an historical predecessor to the Vai Kingdom. I would also like to relate later in this talk to a historical parallel found in the Bamon tradition of about the same time period as the Vai source. Other Vai manuscripts from the 19th century help fill in the chronological period between the invention of the indigenous Vai script in about 1832 and the height of its use. Some of these have been translated, but not all. To help set the stage from the Timbuktu tradition, we may consider the argument of Ahmad Baba al-Timbukti, writing in Miraj al-Sud, the scale of ascendance, in the early 1600s against the enslavement of Islamic people in the trans-Saharan trade on the basis of race. Timothy Cleveland writes that al-Timbukti, writing in response to questions from a Northern African merchant, Sayyid ibn Abdurrahim al-Jirari, rejected the interpretation commonly held at the time of the curse of the biblical figure Ham. Ham was the son of Noah, upon whom a curse was said to have been laid in Genesis 9, and that had been taken in several religious traditions to justify the enslavement of Black Africans, including in Islam. The justification is not one found in the Quran, but one that entered Islam through exposure to Christian and Jewish texts. Sadly, this rejection by al-Timbukti of this justification appears not to have survived past the end of the Mali Empire into the successor Vai Kingdom in Liberia, although there were available pathways by which it could have. The Soninke and a subgroup, the Jahanka, were both active in the period between the 17th and 19th centuries up to the Guinea coast. The 12-page document by al-Timbukti could potentially have been transmitted to serve as one source of jurisprudence for the courts of the Vai Kingdom to follow, but this apparently did not happen as the Soninke and Jahanke ethnic groups were heavily dependent on slavery as part of their own caste systems. Of the Vai manuscripts written in the 19th century that have survived, two were found in Harvard's Houghton Library, one at the British Library, one in the Amistad Research Center of Tulane University, one at the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Munich, and one by Duwalu Bukele that was published with a translation in a 1976 article by Sven Holso. Some of them have been translated and describe various aspects of daily life and familial relations. The two that remain untranslated are a short one at Harvard and the one in Munich. Out of all of these, only the Bukele manuscript is known to have discussed aspects of slaveholding or slavery, although there is a known logogram, which I can point out here. If you see in the section that I've outlined on the right, it says Toba Famisa wa Jong Afala. The Jong element is the word that can be taken to mean slave. It may have had a historical meaning as servant more generally, but the common understood meaning now is slave. It has the semantic value as slave or enslaved person, and it was recorded in secondary literature and has been digitally encoded. Part of what is known to us about Vai slavery in the 19th century comes to us through the story of the Amistad. Of the captives, at least 6 had traveled through Vai country or were captured by Vai enslavers. Grevo or Gilder, pictured here on the left, in William Townsend's sketch, was a rice planter who could speak Vai and 3 other languages. Singbe was also captured in the Vai country along with Gilder. And another captive, Kagnye, was a young girl who had started to learn to count in Vai, according to Josiah Gibbs. None of the Amistad captives are known to have written in the Vai script, nor are they mentioned in extant Vai manuscripts, but their legacy is enduring and relevant. Despite the destruction of the slave factory at Lomboko in 1849 and an 1850 treaty signed by Prince Mana of the Galinas, the topic of slavery arises again in Vai manuscripts in the early 20th century with the Kiakpomgbo diary. He wrote from a position as that of a Vai slave owner, although much of what he writes about is from dreams he has had, and his general reliability as a narrator, going by the days of the week and the dates of the month he associates them with, is open to question. The Boima Kiakpomgbo manuscript diary remained in private hands, undigitized until 2005, and was acquired by the Schomburg Library in 2023, when it was digitized at a higher resolution and made available for further research. I have given one earlier paper at the African Literature Association conference at Yale in 2017, and have co-authored an article on a quantitative linguistics analysis of its linguistic content that was published in the Journal of Quantitative Linguistics. The general setting of the Kiakpomgbo diary's activity between the towns of Mando and Robertsport and the capital city of Monrovia, part of which was known as Vai Town, largely between 1913 and 1923, up to about 1927 is the latest entry. The subject of enslavement comes up first in an entry from April 20th of an unspecified year. Quote, April 20th fell on a Thursday, and the court met to hear the case of in-law Fanbula, and they brought forward the witnesses. He brought forward in-law Bode and the in-law teacher Tube, and Kawaha in his group brought theirs. They brought forward Chief Boima Jaha from Boloma, Soko Soni Sahani, and Elder Boima Jaha Tube. We did not give the verdict. These are the witnesses of my opponent Wasini. One side was to pay £3 and 11 shillings. We took £7 from one side, and we took £7 from the other. And we divided the enslaved persons. Mamako received 9, and the in-law Momolu Duwalu received 7. But the matter was handled on Friday. It was during the month during which plants produce flowers, and the case was in Jinska on the 22nd day in Robertsport. The historian Makrufi Usman Traore makes the distinction between the Atlantic merchant slavery and African social stratification, whereby in the latter case the Jom, a cognate term with Vai from another Mande language, belonged not to individual enslavers but to the Tonjon, or larger state. In this example from the Vai case, they are being divided by the courts to individual ownership. The manuscript diary raises a number of important questions. It also helps provide some answers for those who wonder whether the League of Nations Commission report went far enough in 1930. This report was mainly looking at forced labor practices with regard to Liberia's relations with the then Spanish colony of Fernando Po, now a part of Equatorial Guinea, but it also touched on indigenous enslavement. While it stopped short of fully condemning the practices, it did result in the resignations of the president Charles D.B. King, and Vice President of Liberia, Alan Yancey. It did not prompt the complete surrender of the sovereignty of Liberia to international control, however, although it may well have. According to the League of Nations Commission report, the local courts were one place that enslaved persons could look to obtain their freedom, albeit not by making the case on their own behalf, but through an advocate. Going by the available evidence from the diary, such granting of freedom was not automatic, and I could not find later examples when it happened for an enslaved person. In one case, though, more details on the courts are shown as the names of judges are provided from the summary of court proceedings of a case involving enslaved persons. Quote, this is the author of the diary speaking. I and the people of Dia talked the matter on September 12, 1913. The daughter of Fandula Kato's wife, Bena, the daughter of Wiwa, Joro, Siafaha, Ndilo, and Malfeli said nothing concrete in the court of Yoa Jema Morsi. It was I, Boima from Mando, who transferred the case, and we cross over it with a cross from the Bai country. That is where we and the people of Dia gave our explanations. And they dismissed us and called us, saying, you will give 10 shillings, 10 shillings. And we gave it, and they said, that which you have said, we heard it. But Sensi, the father of Boima, was the one that did the wrong. In Robertsport, he said that the woman is not a trained enslaved person. That was the same thing that he said there in the court downtown. I said, therefore, they should give you 15 pounds. And they gave 1 pound as a cost of court. And they sent someone to bring the 15 pounds. The person that Dia met is called Bolahema. These are the names of those who sat as judges in the case. In-law Momo Fanbere, in-law Arma Kumasaki, and Elder Molivai in September 1913. The manuscript also helps fill in some of the context of what Holso described about the nature of white slavery. Holso in 1976 described indigenous white slavery as a form of chattel slavery, implying a hereditary or generational element, citing his then forthcoming article in an edited volume. But in the 1977 volume, Slavery in Africa, also appears to have dropped the term chattel, but retained a notion of generational enslavement as one of 4 ways by which domestic enslaved persons could enter into the condition of enslavement. The other 3 were as captives of war, commission of a crime, or what was termed human pawning at the time, importing from a neighboring ethnic group such as the Bassa or the Pele. Pawning as such carried another sense in the main categories of servitude described by Holso, and in this sense it was as senu, pawning by, for example, a maternal uncle in service of a debt, whereby the pawn would still retain their free status as a manja denu, chief's child, a freeborn person. If the pawn was not of Bai origin, they may have slipped into domestic slavery, another of 3 categories of servitude, the other one being indentured laborers. Lovejoy explains this somewhat further. Quote, another term that confuses the problem further is pawn. Clearly, pawns were theoretically distinct from enslaved persons because pawns had recognized kinship affiliations and were technically being held for debt. The debt was held and usually could be transferred, but the pawn was not chattel. Nonetheless, pawns could become enslaved persons, and apparently many did. The distinction between pawn and enslaved person became blurred in some places, particularly in the 19th century. This level of detail is not quite revealed in the Kiakpomgbo diary. Neither the term senu nor manja denu comes up. To the contrary, as I mentioned, it was the maternal uncle who had pawned a nephew. When a nephew is mentioned, it is in the context of his having brought up upon the author financial worries to the point of where he's concerned about having to mortgage myself in order to give the money. The issue of repayment is like a quote, slave rope around my neck. Quoting from Kiakpomgbo, my biological child, be it male or female, if it becomes possible within his or her power, should remember this that my nephew Pewa has done to me. They gave 1 week for the money matter to be settled. This has made the money matter to me like a slave rope that is tied about my neck. I have no way to breathe. I will eat food and my heart is not at peace. My relatives have paid some of it, but once I mortgage myself in order to give the money, this is not how the Lord God put these things into this world. This is also an excerpt that reveals remorse about the general condition of enslavement as considered by Kiakpomgbo. This is not to say that he is free of empathy except insofar as the condition may come to apply to himself, but it is a point where he becomes the most introspective and reflective about it. The pawning of oneself, if that is indeed what Kiakpomgbo is contemplating here, appears to be an exception to the categories laid out by Holso and described in the League of Nations Commission's report, but is perhaps not unsurprising as a possibility. An example of enslaved persons being used as an exchange of value occurs in the following excerpt about dowry for a bride. Quote, on November 26, 1914, we went to Fali on Saturday to dowry a wife for Kwompo. We broke news of our intention on Sunday morning. They fed us with one big hen and plenty of polished rice, and they brought 1 shilling, presenting themselves as the family of the groom, and we accepted it and asked for the road of departure. And they asked us to stay. We slept, and the next morning we met, and Elder Saka said, I want for you to abandon your child to be between us. I said, then say it to my hearing. And he came with 1 pound, and I said, now come and lay the mat for the woman. And he came with 1 pound, making it 2 pounds and 2 shillings. I said, now you will dowry the woman with 10 lapas or cloths, 5 pounds and 2 enslaved persons. And he withheld word to return after 2 months. This excerpt from the League of Nations Christie International Commission of Inquiry in Liberia, report of 1930, tells us more about the specifics of slavery among the Vai and other ethnic groups, as it was experienced even while the Constitution of Liberia had prohibited it. Lastly, I would like to bring in a document from the Bamum tradition of Cameroon by way of comparison, as there are some historical ties between the Vai and the Bamum, and the document is relevant to the study of slavery. Also notes in a footnote to his 1977 work that, quote, I have argued the possibility that the Bamum script in East Cameroons was invented through the stimulus of the Vai, who were literate in their own script and who were present in the area. The document is seen here in the context of the Bamum Script and Archive Project, funded by the Endangered Archives Project with the support of the Arcadia Foundation and hosted by the British Library. This document is not representative of what is found in the full archive. The manuscripts cover a wide range of subject material. It is illustrative, though, one facet of Bamum history in that it records the purchase of an enslaved person by Nsangu, son of Njima Ma, from a man called Ma, on December 26, 1919. It has not yet been fully translated. It does clearly bear the stamp of the Royal Bamum Kingdom. In conclusion, I think I've shown that while evidence from the diary partially corroborates the findings of the League of Nations Commission and the analysis of Sven Holso, Paul Lovejoy, and others, in other important ways it diverges. We see that the courts were not always ready to enforce the constitutional anti-slavery provision, as the Commission also found. Arguments from the time of the ending of the Mali Empire were not upheld against enslavement, although there were continuing cultural flows that could have made that possible. Kiakpomgbo's sense of empathy or remorse over the condition of slavery only really comes into relief when he himself is vulnerable to mortgage himself, an option that also appears not to have contemplated in his description of the process of pawning. Holso's assertion that Vai script use may have influenced Bamum culture is underscored here, but inconclusive. Waibaika, thank you in particular to Tabakai Sherman, the translator, Mohammed Ye, the donor of the manuscript, the late Sven Holso, Barry Brown at the Schomburg, Shel Barreto at the Binding Team, AJ Mohammed, Piers Kelly, Denise Monte, John Singler, Conrad Turksher, and many others.
Thank you, Charles.
You want to stop sharing?
It's questions and answer time. I have a few, but I'm going to open it to the floor in the room first. Tom Thurston.
Thank you. Charles, it's great seeing you. I want to say that how much, it may have been 4 or 5 years ago that we had a Zoom meeting with teachers from Sierra Leone where you talked quite a bit about this. I really appreciate it. That was part of a program we did at the center to bring American students in Sierra Leone, or teachers and teachers in Sierra Leone, together to kind of share in kind of our common histories, especially around the homicide case. But it brings up like a larger question: is it, I'm sure, I've spent time like at the archives in Sierra Leone, and it's almost exclusively colonial records, which are of course very valuable, and there's a lot to be gleaned from them. But are there any efforts on the part of
institutions like Yale or the Schomburg or places that hold these really unique indigenous documents to kind of share them with West Africans and others to make, the kind of wonderful kind of resources that one way or another found their way to the United States available to the people of Africa?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been in touch with most of the institutions that hold copies of my manuscripts. And one thing I've done has been to virtualize a collection of those, putting them together in one space on the web, so you can kind of consult all of them at the same time from a single entry point. With the Mando manuscripts from the 1950s that Boima Kiakpomgbo wrote, he was a Mando goldsmith. I've had those up on a site called the 10,000 Rooms Project. And that came to an end in August. At least the funding fell through. So it's been like technically pushed offline, but it's not completely offline yet. You can still go to the 10,000 Rooms Project and find it. I am looking for a more permanent home for those. So I'll keep working on that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for that talk. Now, for the people who study African manuscripts, has there been a tradition of translation of these manuscripts going back to the times when they were there? I mean, were there people during colonial times who were translating these languages or even developing some sort of rudimentary dictionary so that, scholars can decipher what they're saying?
The translation has happened more in recent times with the Boima manuscript and the Boima archive and everything. The Boima Manuscripts and Archives Project has been going since 2006, and they've translated things as far as the metadata for the manuscripts and everything, so you can know what the manuscript is about without knowing the full text of it. It would take more funding to go through and do the translation of the full text and everything, but we are working on that piece by piece.
Yeah.
Given the number of languages that you work with in these traditions, the Timbuktu traditions, the Bantu tradition that you touched upon, when it comes to slavery, what is the most unique, noteworthy, or surprising thing that you've learned about slavery in that tradition?
That's a good question. I think the part that struck me the most was the reflection that Boima Kiakpomgbo had on like the possibility of fawning himself. And kind of struck me as, I mean, he was in a position where you would think he wouldn't have to, that, he was high enough in status and everything that he wouldn't have to pawn himself into slavery, but thinking of how he would contemplate doing that has been a surprise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's an old, I don't call it a tradition, but that people of higher status, military, social, scribes, or otherwise, had to, at times, in this history, sell themselves or be enslaved in order to be secure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's surviving into the 20th century.
Yeah.
That seems to me. I mean, and slavery was surviving in the Persian Gulf in the 20th century, and plenty of Indian Ocean and other places. But that's interesting. It's only 100 years ago, if that. So I mean, that is surprising to me. Other questions here? Yes, sir.
Could you say something about the alphabet more generally? I mean, it does, was that thank you at the end?
That was thank you at the end.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
couldn't quite tell if it was it's an alphabet or a syllable.
It's the syllabary.
Yeah, could you just say a little bit more about that? And also, could you say more about the relationship between individual enslavement and Dshondu or whatever that arrangement was?
So the syllabary consists of about 300 characters or so. It has been digitally encoded now since about 2006 or so in the Unicode standard. And the system fonts became available for it beginning around 2010 or so. So emails have been exchanged to the Bayerische and we have an incubated by Wikipedia set up and everything. So things have progressed a little bit along there on the civilization tree and stuff. So and then in terms of the Tonjon, this comes to us from Traore, and he was looking at Pate Jan. I think it's his source for understanding the term John and how it relates to the wider state as a whole. I haven't read as much of Traore as I need to, and John I've barely touched so far. So there's more to be said about it, but I don't have the specific details.
Tonzo means association, right?
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, there's lots of cognitive work too, so
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Were the people that you kind of found who were writing in the Vice script, do they know the Arabic script as well? Do they know like kind of Greco-Roman scripts? I mean, are they kind of lingual in these different types of scripts, or are they strictly writing in Vi as far as you can see?
Tamakai is the principal translator for the works that I've mentioned and stuff. His familiarities between Vi script and Romanization. So the Romanized form of the Vi script sometimes takes like extended phonetic letters and everything. So it's to that extent, but I don't think he has much Arabic, if any. There was a work from 1981 by Sylvia scrivener Michael Cole that goes into more detail about the relationship between different literacies and does like sociological surveys of Arabic versus Vi versus Latin script literacy and everything, and the effects that has on psychology and everything. So the book is called Psychology of Literacy. It's a foundational study.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of psychology, this diary seems to have become quite introspective, quite personal.
Yeah.
Did you say a word about that? I mean, it's diary material. It's almost like a memoir. It's a personal revelation of some sort. I mean, can it be read in that sense, the modern sense of this done at the dawn of the age of psychology, or a little after, I guess. Would he have been aware of that? Maybe not, but still, he's doing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's aware of the stream of consciousness or anything to do with the psychology of literacy. But yeah, he's just doing it on his own. I think we used to think of the diary as it used to be called the Book of Dreams before we went in and studied it a little bit more. So now it's more just like Boima Kiakpomgbo's diary.
The assumption was that he was recording his dreams.
The thing we were thinking about was that it was mostly his dreams that he was recording. So there is a lot of that in there, but
Very modern.
Right.
Or is it? I don't know. Gosh. Also, when Vi script emerges in the 1830s,
yeah,
the assumption here is this has always been an oral language. some people make a script of it in that decade or in those years. Perhaps it's happening all over it. What do we know? What do you great linguists know about that process of when the ancient oral tradition is written, and why?
One of the works that comes to mind is Walter On's book, Orality and Literacy. He has his critics, and it goes along with like Jack Doty's argument about literacy, the effect that literacy has on psychology and everything. But I think Scrivener and Cole have demonstrated that just being exposed to more than one script doesn't increase the intelligence you have. It doesn't like make you all of a sudden, so intelligent. But so it's not like the quantum leap that Jack really might think it is. And stuff.
But it's just so fascinating to me, and I don't have any answers. Why and when people decide they need script, they need it written. Is there a power in the writing? Have they witnessed, say, the slave traders for a century or two,
right?
With all their written documents,
right?
That means something.
That means something. I mean, it's a little bit unexplored, the exact effect that the slave trade might have had on inspiring the script. Strand also is also known for coming up with a hypothesis that it was a stimulated diffusion from the results of being exposed to Cherokee settlers in Liberia and stuff. So there was a Cherokee settler by the name of August Curtis, who Conrad Texture and P.E.A. Sher wrote an article about. The article is Cherokee in West Africa, a case of stimulus diffusion. So, as the freedmen and former African American slaves were settling in Liberia
from the 1820s
on, there was a Cherokee settler among them. So.
Well, speaking of
Cherokee settler was a missionary. Okay. So they were involved with the people.
They were involved with treaties and stuff. I don't know if they were a missionary.
Speaking of Conrad Tucksher,
is he there?
Yes, he's got a question. So I thought maybe we could jump in with that. Are you aware? Oh, he's got two questions. When you call, he says, "Thank you for your excellent presentation." When you call the symbol for slave, Jong, in the Vai script a logogram, are you using logogram as a shorthand to describe its iconic nature, or was it actually used as a logogram? Have you compared Kiakpomgbo's particular character with the earlier uses of this symbol?
I did a search for it in the translated text of the diary and didn't find the logogram being used. I'm just saying logogram as something that appears in context that's not a syllable but stands for a word. And I'm not sure all the definitions that derive from that, but that's the essence of how I'm using it. So I didn't find it in the Kiakpomgbo diary standing out as logographic use. What was the other part of the question?
That was the one question. Have you compared that character with the earlier uses of this symbol?
So in the Kiakpomgbo diary, it comes through as two combinations, or one combination of two syllables, sounding it out as jo n with the syllabic nasal at the end, instead of the single character. The place where it comes up before that I've seen it is in the manuscript that I showed from Holso, who was analyzing Bukele, and there it does show up as a logogram, but also transcribed it in the syllabic form and stuff. So yeah, more comparison can be made. I haven't done a lot yet, but
Mhm.
that manuscript dates to about 1843. It was written in the time of the King Siaka, while he was still living, and reports on the death of a person called Sao.
And he has another, Conrad has another question, if
Okay.
I may. Are you aware of any oral history research done in Liberia on Kiakpomgbo, as it would be interesting to see what can be recovered from this other source, including who he learned it from, perhaps going back to its inventors like Bukele?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to follow the chain of transmission of the knowledge of the script. I don't know of any that's been done on that particularly, although Piers Kelly, who's in Australia, has done, I would say, sort of secondary analysis of like looking at the manuscripts that exist and comparing them to secondary sources and tracing through the developments of character shapes that way. But he hasn't gone through and established like the chain of transmission of learning the script. It used to be more prevalent, so it might be harder to get at in terms of a specific tree of genealogy or anything like that. But yes, sir.
Yeah, I wonder about if the Vai were greater slave owners than any other group, because they were one of the latest immigrants to the coast, and they are Manding. And the Manding were a powerful group, of course. And there's a lot of documentation about how they had superior weapons and so forth. And there were usually people connect them to the invasions of the coast all the way up to Guinea on the coast. So they were, I think, an advanced people in some ways, technologically anyway. And also the Manding have a system of glyphs, which were documented by German Gilder. And I looked at some of those, and they do seem somewhat similar to the Vai script, but I can't see any direct derivation. But I wonder whether that's being explored.
Yeah. For comparison with other West African groups, there'd be others like the Dogon or the Bassa or the Pele to look at. Pele were a Vai, or a Mende group. So, I haven't looked much at Toby Green's work, but he might be somebody to check out in terms of.
We know Toby, he's on that book recommendation.
Right.
We may be bringing him here for a talk.
Okay.
Were there opportunities for manumission during this time period?
Were there what?
Were there opportunities for manumission?
There supposedly were through the courts. If you had an advocate, you can, and if you were being treated cruelly, you could make the case for emancipation and stuff. But so manumission would be more like the slave owner themselves deciding to release the slave, or.
So if you pawned yourself, would you contemplate a time period when you might get out of it?
I didn't really find evidence for getting out of pawnship, but I mean, I think that was part of the idea. Maybe not the actual story of what happened, but at least the idea of pawnship was that it could be temporary. But what I saw evidence of more broadly was going from being a pawn to falling into domestic slavery and stuff. So it seems like it sort of pushed you down and not up, and
Or the other way.
yeah,
Downward mobility.
right.
Another question online?
Yeah, there's a few here. One is just a simple question. How did Yale acquire the document?
This was acquired by the Schomburg. I might not be that clear.
Okay, right.
But it was from Mohammed Yeh, and his preference was to see it go to the Schomburg.
And then Mark Dietz says, thanks for the great talk. In your opinion, what's the most important thing the Vi manuscript tells us? What's the argument here?
Something that I touched on in an earlier talk about it was the outbreak of World War I from the Liberian perspective. I think, they talked about German ships and French and the English and stuff, all kind of congregating around Monrovia. So I think that's probably one of the most interesting things to come out of the diary.
Is there any evidence that Boima had ever been to sea or the author?
The author,
or abroad within West Africa?
Not that I can find. No. He does relate to other political figures though, like Charles King comes up. And talks about some dignitaries seated for an event and things like that.
I was curious about this League of Nations report. It's easy to forget the League of Nations is still around in 1930, and with its checkered history. But of course, it comes out of that environment of the World War I.
Yeah.
And I happen to be doing a lot of research on James Weldon Johnson, and he's writing weekly columns on the New York Age, and he's all over this question of what is the League going to do with this is 1917, 1890. What is the League going to do about Africa? What about Africa?
Yeah.
And in fact, he calls it the greatest question before the world. Well, there are many of them.
Yeah.
But well, here's one answer. They do at least investigate the survival of slave systems within Africa, and they find that yes, that they do exist. So I mean, that's worth remembering. Pointing out. And of course, the UN still tries to do that, and it's sometimes hapless ways, but it's trying to monitor this problem. Do you get, I mean, in African studies and African history, and we have Africans in the room, do you get this question from the public? Maybe you archivists don't see the public that often, but you should. Indigenous slavery in West Africa. Those of us who are historians know that this existed. It existed for centuries and centuries, different forms. Do you still find people surprised by this? I mean, not in your immediate community of linguists and scholars and translators, but broader.
I was surprised to find the extent of it. It's one thing coming to the manuscript. I was mainly interested in the by script and everything, and that aspect of it.
Sure.
I was surprised how much there was about slavery written in the diary and everything. How much of a story it told.
Yeah.
So I think bringing that out into the open is kind of a good thing. It's not something we're meant to hide or anything.
No. How long is this study of African languages and the depth that you do it? 50 years old? 60 years old? Does it begin in the mid-20th century? I mean, African history itself in the West, born in the 1950s, really, at a few different places.
Philology goes back farther.
Philology is older than the historian.
Yale Divinity School is built on philology, and
right.
It's ancient languages.
Sure.
That included Ethiopic at the time, Gez.
Okay.
So you have within Yale Library polyglot dictionaries or polyglot New Testaments that are written or published in multiple Semitic languages and stuff, and Gez is one of those. So.
Okay.
And Josiah Gibbs, who I mentioned, he's 1830s, and he's studying Mando as well.
That's true. Wow. I know, it's fascinating. I went to Wisconsin to graduate school where they like to claim African history was born. It's not quite true, but Phil Curtin and others. But that's in the historian's craft.
Yeah.
But a lot of them had to learn languages too.
Right.
Messina, for example, in order to even begin to do what they were doing from the 50s on, 60s. But it makes sense that language comes first.
Mhm.
Philology comes first,
Yeah.
of course. What got you so interested in this topic?
I think what got me interested in Bai specifically was the fact that I'd run into references to it, but not seen examples of it while I was a grad student and everything. So I was interested in finding examples of the Bai script, and so I started looking out for those. And
What about the original interest in African languages?
it goes back to high school.
High school.
I did a paper on African and European contact and everything. So,
There, good.
yeah. Wow.
We do have some more questions coming in. Adam Jones.
Uh-huh.
All your
Given
friends and critics are on the line.
Yeah.
Given the small proportion of Vai speakers who ever mastered the script, there was once a discussion about how its use related to matters of secrecy, and in particular to the Men's Poro Society. Presumably, the diary sheds no light on this? Question mark.
Not that I can find. I don't see it as coming out of the Poro or Sande tradition. But I mean, the fact that it doesn't mention it doesn't mean that it's not. I'm not. There is an interesting question of like whether the Vai script was associated with initiation practices into either of the societies. Is this the Adam Jones from Germany or the one from Canada?
I don't know. Maybe he'll respond. All I know is Adam Jones. We do have some other questions. Somebody's wondering if there's a full translation of the document publicly available.
There is a provisional translation up on a blog that I keep. It's called Cataloging Africana, and that's where we kept the scans of the document that they were made here at Yale.
So if somebody searches for Charles Riley cataloging the Africana,
yeah,
they might find it. Okay.
yeah, and once you're in the blog, you can do a search for 1913 and go on with it.
Okay, and a few kind of specific questions. Are the characters similar to Adinkra?
Adinkra. Not really. Adinkra was used more for funerary cloths, and they're not like syllables the way the bisyllabary is. Yeah, I'm not thinking of any real similarity.
And a question about the currency that's referred to. Liberia uses the US dollar, but the manuscript seems to indicate some other currency.
Right. There was a time when Liberia was on the British West African pound, or the West African pound, which was pegged to the British pound sterling. I think that was the case for the time period covered.
And did individuals that came from the US or not native to Liberia participate in the slavery commerce?
Individuals in the US not native to Liberia.
That came to Liberia from the US.
Being African American.
Yeah, the American Liberians,
Hopefully not.
well, I mean, I think it was known as a practice. It did go against what the Constitution said, and the American Liberians were responsible for developing the Constitution. So, but as the League of Nations report said, there is often slavery in spite of what the Constitution said. But there were abolitionists among the American Liberians who wanted to see even indigenous slavery like wiped out or anything, but they had resistance from the chiefs to do that.
Just a follow up on that.
Yeah.
Yes, there were quite a few African Americans who went to, especially Sierra Leone and Guinea, and I imagine Liberia. I think I have read that it was in Liberia too. But yes, it's very well documented. There's an archaeologist who has dug up the entire port that was owned by African Americans in Guinea, and their ancestors are still there with English names.
Yeah, this question was, did they participate in the slave trade?
Yes,
The slave
that's what I'm saying.
Oh,
Yes, African Americans went specifically to West Africa to participate in the slave trade. That's,
When in
documented
Guinea,
very well.
Guineans. Yeah, that shouldn't shock it. Well, it may be shocking, but it shouldn't shock us given
I
the
didn't.
commerce of the Atlantic over years.
Well, it shouldn't shock us because that's what the trade was. I mean, everyone who was involved in international trade up to the 19th century was involved in the slave trade. That was an integral part of all international trade.
It was. Same in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Joseph?
Yes, you mentioned a case in which I think a party of people left a woman, and my impression is that she was enslaved. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But there was also, there was some sort of exchange about that. But then there was a discussion, I can't remember which word you used, dowry or bride wealth, right?
Dowry.
And can you say, I mean, that's an interesting kind of overlap there, a sort of, if you will, purchase, but then also an exchange that integrates a person into networks of marriage and kinship. Do you have any idea of what was going on there?
I think they were raising the terms of negotiation for the dowry and stuff. Like at one point it started out, just a shilling or a pound back and forth and stuff, and then there's like adding conditions onto that for what the dowry would amount to and stuff. So,
But if somebody, but that woman was going to be enslaved, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, she wasn't. Okay, so I was wondering how that related. Okay, maybe I misunderstood.
Right. The dowry was included enslaved people as part of the exchange.
Right. Okay.
So part of the capital that would be counted towards the dowry.
Right. Can you also say something more about the courts, like under whose authority they operated and what kinds of law they do?
Yeah. That's something I don't know as much about as I should. I don't know what the relationship was between the courts in the Baye Kingdom and the Republic of Liberia. I assume because they were local courts, they were more responding to like the needs of the county and stuff. So that's where I thought the manuscript from Timbuktu might influence their jurisprudence more so than the constitutional provision and everything. But both the Constitution and the Timbuktu manuscript and the treaty signed by Prince Mana from 1850, they all went against slavery as an institution, and they were all, banning it outright and stuff. But they weren't enforcing it as much as they liked, and that's what the League of Nations report is telling us too. Is that the constitutional provision is there, but the courts aren't responding by enforcing it.
Abolition in Africa was a long and tortured process.
Yes.
Lam Yeah. Can I just say thank you for taking us into, a subject, a method, language that most of us, of course, don't know. Permit me one little anecdote. I'm reminded, and you work on vast numbers of manuscript compared to this guy. The one year I spent at Cambridge, I was sitting at one of the feast dinners next to one of the dons. What do you do? What do you do? I told him I studied this and that about American history. He said, oh, you have so many documents. He said, I've studied the same 3 cuneiform tablets all of my life. 4 books on them. I said, wait a minute, 4 books on 3 cuneiform? Yes. I remember myself being envious. He only has 3 tablets. On the other hand, it's a life's work. But you must feel that way at times. You have these languages you're helping translate, decipher. Precious few manuscripts. I take it. But growing, we keep finding them. They're boxes in attics, or did we say in America, they're boxes in somebody's attic? No.
I would say like, the universe is getting broader, as more scripts are encoded into the Unicode standard.
Yeah.
And as the Library of Congress is, expanding the number of languages that it supports the encoding of. So it used to be the case that we were limited to describing materials in the metadata, to this constricted set of 490 languages. And now they're allowing us codes that reach out to another 6,500 languages beyond that. So,
Whoa.
Wow.
So the Library of Congress had, control over like how many languages you could represent in a source and stuff. And although there were broad categories of language families that they would allow, they're now allowing us to like go into more detail than they had before. So.
And the assault on,
This is independent of the assault.
okay, right, good. They haven't got down to that level yet, thank God. Any final questions from in the room or out in the universe? Well, again, Charles, thank you. This was fascinating, truly. And come back with the next manuscript you find. What's all about?
There's the Munich manuscript that hasn't been translated.
Oh, right.
There's a short one. There's a short one at Harvard that I hope Conrad and Mohammed will work on.
Oh, okay. You got that out there, Conrad? Great. Okay. And see you around the library.